Thanks, Hans. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexander Schneiders. Thank you for being here. Just going to briefly introduce myself. So I'm a researcher at the Energy Institute at University College London, and I'm also the operating agent of the Global Observatory on peer-to-peer community self-consumption and transactive energy models, which is quite a mouthful. In short, we call it Go P2P. So what I'm going to do in this webinar is I'm going to, I can't see my slide moving. Can you see my slide move?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to introduce the Global Observatory to you. I'll talk about some of our emerging findings so far and also some details on how to join if you're interested in joining. And then we'll have the Q&A and I'll be happy to answer your questions and also have a discussion about what I said in this webinar. So before I start, I just want to say a bit of a disclaimer. So whatever I say in this webinar does not represent the International Energy Agency. The Global Observatory is an initiative of the Users Technology Collaboration Program, Users TCP, and that's an initiative of the IEA. But so the Global Observatory is not part of the IEA and we don't represent their views. Just wanted to make that clear. So a bit of context before I talk about the observatory. So I'm not sure how many of you here are familiar with peer-to-peer energy models. At this stage, it's becoming easy to produce renewable energy through cheaper renewable energy technologies, for example, with solar panels on the rooftop. So consumers are increasingly producing their own energy at home. And currently, they're selling it back to the energy supplier. But peer-to-peer goes a step further, and it allows for selling it directly to other consumers of renewable energy produced by a consumer. So at this stage, it's at the pilot stage. There are many pilots being rolled out all across the world, an increasing amount of pilots. It's a pre-competitive stage, so it's really testing out how it works, what kind of technologies can be the best configuration, best design. And the technologies that are being used, many pilots include blockchain, which I'm going to touch upon later in the webinar, which is a distributed ledger technology. And so in many countries, it's actually not legal to trade energy with other consumers, but in Europe, particularly, it's become now a right to trade energy in the Renewable Energy Directive. And countries will have to transpose this right by 2021. So policymakers are also really thinking of the details because this right is very vague in the European legislation. The right to trade is there, but there are no details, for example, as regards tariffs or market design or anything. So at the moment, there is a need. Oh, sorry, I'm just, I'm going to talk about why we need the Global Observatory, but before I do that, I'm just going to show you this diagram here, which kind of shows the trading of energy. So this is with blockchain, as I said, is a very common technology for trading energy. And the smart meter is really crucial in these models. The smart meter measures incoming, outgoing energy flows. And then if you connect the smart meter to one of these new technologies, decentralizing technologies like blockchain, the mix of those two together can lead to the trading of energy and the financial transactions between people, automatic ones. So there's not much intervention needed by centralized parties. So that's the appeal also of these peer-to-peer systems, which we've seen in other sectors of the economy other than energy. So now onto the need for the Global Observatory. So as I was saying, many countries are now thinking of making it a right to trade energy. So many regulators, policymakers are thinking about the details and specifics of these models. And there are also many pilots being developed all over the world, but there wasn't really an international platform to gather everyone from industry, policy, nonprofits, research into one international platform. So this is our aim, to provide this international forum, let's say, and for people to exchange best practices with one another on the development of pilots, on the researching of these models, and also to provide evidence to policymakers that are designing these models. So we got started about a year ago. We launched in London. So University College London, which is where I'm based, we're leading the Global Observatory. It's a 3.5-year project, and we have 150 participants from 20 countries. So it's really an international project. We have 8 member countries, which you can see here: Australia, Belgium, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and United States. And so that means that the policymakers from those countries have actively decided to join the Global Observatory because they need the evidence of how peer-to-peer models are designed in other countries. So they really want to see the evidence internationally. And we also have 2 accession countries, Germany and Colombia, who will hopefully join soon. And we also have participants from 10 other countries. So those 10 other countries are not members of the observatory. So this means that we won't be able to look at pilots in those countries, but the people based in those countries are still part of our network, and they're there in an advisory role. So yeah, we still include them within the network. And in total, we have from academia, I think it's the largest group, 108 people. Then we have people from industry and nonprofits as well. So as I said, it's really, GoP2P is really a forum for people from different sectors working in this field. In terms of the structures, so we have subtasks, and the subtasks, they represent the essential elements of these peer-to-peer models. And by essential, I mean that they're essential for the functioning of these models. And it's also to really provide us with a global view of these peer-to-peer models. So, for example, we have subtask 1, which is on power system integration, and that's about how to integrate these peer-to-peer models into the energy grid. Then we have subtask 2, which is more on the hardware, software, data aspect. So, for example, what kind of technology do we use to enable trading of energy? Subtask 3 on transactions and markets. How do you design the markets, the peer-to-peer markets? Who do you allow to join? How do you decide what kind of consumers can join? What should they have, like PV or battery storage? Subtask 4 is about economic and social value. So what value do participants get out of these peer-to-peer networks? Is it more economic reasons? Do they want to make some money on the side, or social, altruistic? Because you can also donate energy within these networks, not just sell. And then we have subtask 5, which is on policy and regulation. And as I said, many countries are thinking of how to regulate these models, but regulation still remains one of the big obstacles for the rollout of these models because there's just not enough of it or none of it that enables peer-to-peer energy trading. So all these subtasks are led by different organizations all across the world. And the participants of the Global Observatory, they can join any subtask they would like. So we have some people who have joined all the subtasks because they are involved in developing pilots of peer-to-peer. So they really want to get this global overview. So what these subtasks will do is that they will work together for the key aim of the observatory, which is to gather information from pilots of peer-to-peer and community self-consumption in the member countries of the Global Observatory. And by gather information, I mean, for example, like conduct interviews of the pilots, of the participants, the organizations in charge of the pilots. And then the final aim is to compare this information and to run an international comparative analysis of the information. And for this, we're thinking of using qualitative comparative analysis, which is a method which allows for the comparing of different contexts. I mean, like different national contexts, so with different histories, different regulatory frameworks. And the result will be for reports where, on the basis of this international comparison, we will see what the main factors are that either inhibit or enable the uptake of these business models. And we would also like to develop a national readiness index, which will allow us to see how ready a country is, let's say, for the rollout of the models. This could be useful not only for policymakers, but also for industry and nonprofits working in the field who would like to see what the situation is in a particular country. And then also, as I said, we are a network, very international network. So we really encourage participants to collaborate together on additional additional deliverables, for example, conference sessions, journal special issues. We've also had people who have found a partner for pilots through the network of the Global Observatory. So this is also an aim of ours, to really allow for exchange of insights and collaboration between people all over the world. We've had quite a lot of international engagement. Our last event in September was supported by the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Naturally, we have a link with the International Energy Agency, IEA. And we also recently launched a task force with INATBA, which is the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, also a very long name. And it was launched in September. And as I said, a lot of these pilots, they're using blockchain technology to enable trading of energy. So they need, even though the Global Observatory is technology agnostic, so we look at all technologies, we have to acknowledge the fact that there is a special interest in distributed ledger technology, such as blockchain, and that there are additional risks involved in using blockchain technology, which I'm going to talk about a bit later, but basically risks that go beyond the energy field, let's say. So data privacy, for example, contract validity, things like that. And this task force will aim to look at these issues, especially the standardization efforts going on right now. So blockchain is quite interesting for everyone at the moment. It's quite a popular technology, and there are many standards being developed around it. Sorry, also on energy trading. So our aim is to look at pilots that use distributed ledger technologies such as blockchain to enable trading. And anyone from GoP2P and the NATBA can join the task force.
Alexandra, sorry to interrupt you for a moment, but I see quite a lot of acronyms in the previous slides. And I think a question came in for TE and CSC. What does that mean?
Yeah, sorry. So P2P, that's peer-to-peer energy trading. TE is Transactive Energy, and Transactive Energy is you could say the American equivalent of peer-to-peer. So it's basically the same as peer-to-peer, more or less, but then that's the word they use in the US. And then community self-consumption, that's CSC. And that's basically, if I scroll back, it's in the title of the Global Observatory. So peer-to-peer, community self-consumption, transactive energy. That's what I mean.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't make that clear. So what stage are we at right now? Well, we're at the stage where we really have to lay the groundwork for our main aim, which is to look at case studies and pilots, as I said. And this stage right now is the beginning. It's taking quite a lot of time. It's quite time intensive, but it's also very important because there really is a lack of consensus in the field. So a lack of consensus on what these models are, what peer-to-peer is, what transactive energy is, community self-consumption is. There are many different understandings of what these things are. And before we select the pilots we will look at and compare, it needs to be clear to us what exactly we're talking about, so that there's consensus between all of us. And what we're doing is, as part of this preparatory phase, is we are doing subtask literature reviews. So we are kind of like seeing what's out there in terms of knowledge and what the knowledge gaps are. And based on this, we will know what to ask the pilots, depending on the gaps. Then we're also agreeing on the research strategy. So what kind of methods we will use for data collection, data analysis. And then, as I said, we need to have a common understanding of what these models mean. So we've been running interviews with the participants to ask them, what do you think are the essential characteristics of these models, peer-to-peer, transactive energy, community self-consumption? And I will talk about the results in the next slide. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there seems to be no consensus at the moment. So these are the essential characteristics that I was mentioning. And as you can see, every subtask, so every layer of GoP2P, they have a different view of what these models what they need to have to function. And I think, as you see with subtask 1, 2, and 3, they're very much focused on the interoperability of these models, on the scalability of these models, which is understandable. So, for example, subtask 1 says that they should operate autonomously. Subtask 2 says that they should meet big data needs. Subtask 3 says that they should be allowed for the trading of different things, such as commodities and services. So it's really about, as I said, the scaling up of these models. And then you have subtask 4 and 5, which is understandably more about the consumer, the community, so more from the ground up. And they say that what's essential is the social units, so reinforcing social values, and also bottom-up governance, so that people have an equal say on how to govern these models. And I see a bit of a tension here. I see a tension between the more large-scale players, like the industry, for example, who want to upscale these models, versus the more small player perspective, where you want to protect consumers and their rights, because consumers are arguably quite vulnerable. If you think about energy consumers, if trading of energy goes wrong, then they can be hurt in this. So yeah, basically I see this tension here on the slide and what we found. So what we did is we then asked people during our last event to assess the interaction between these characteristics and to see if there are potential clashes between them. And this is what we found. So here are some examples. The first one is, for example, subtask 5 says that there should be a bottom-up governance model, and then subtask 1 and 4 say that there should be autonomous operation, dynamic pricing. So I think that here the question is, where do you draw the line in terms of what peer-to-peer is? I mean, if a consumer doesn't have much of a say in how they trade or what price, can that really be called peer-to-peer? If it's completely decided for them, automated. So I think here there's a lot of lack of consensus as regards this question. The second one is in terms of fairness of these models. So for example, subtask 3 said that you should be able to trade different things, energy, services, and then subtask 4 says that it should be open and equitable for everyone. However, there's a question here of fairness, because, for example, those consumers that can trade, energy and services are likely to have the means to afford a solar PV and a battery storage, and they are more attractive for the organizations that will be rolling out these pilots. Whereas the ones that don't have the means to afford these things and to provide services to the network would then be less attractive and could be excluded from these models. So there really is a question here of fairness and openness to everyone. And I think this will be a big one for policymakers to really make sure that these models are fair and open to everyone. The first one on the slide again, so I think this has to do with automation. What I mentioned about, can you call something peer-to-peer if it's automated and decided for you? Or can you also say that it needs to be negotiated, the prices? Then it's really peers getting involved. So again, it's a question of where do you draw the line? And then the next one here, smart meters. So smart meters, as I said, are really crucial for these models, and they contain a lot of valuable information, which could be worth a lot of money, but also information that is quite intrusive, you could say, because they collect information on the energy consumption of the consumers. And I've heard of pilots where the participants were quite worried about the data. So who owns this information, this data collected by smart meters? Is it them who own it? Do they have a say over it? Or is it the company? And I think, again, this will be a question for policymakers to try to resolve this, to make sure that consumers can still have a say over their data. And all these examples on these slides that I just showed you, as I said, they'll be quite relevant for policymakers because countries have their own, political strategies when it comes to these models. So it's quite political in terms of what they want to get out of these business models. But then when it comes to the little details, there will have to be choices made. And also, I think a careful balance between protecting innovation and protecting consumers. So this brings me to my next point. And so my research at UCL is focusing on the legal and regulatory aspects. And as I mentioned, I'm just going to talk about a few examples. As I mentioned before with the smart meters in terms of data, which is quite valuable data. There's also an issue of data with blockchain, because blockchain, the main selling point is that it's immutable. So it's a valuable record of a trustworthy record of information. And it's very difficult to remove information from the blockchain. So there's this new law at European level called General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, in which there's the right to be forgotten, and you can ask for information to be removed from a database. So when it comes to blockchain for energy trading, there's the question of, can you enforce this right, this GDPR right to be forgotten? And then also, who is responsible for removing it? Because blockchain is all about, people can get involved, it's decentralized, no centralized parties. So who actually is responsible for if something goes wrong? And this brings me to my next point. If someone starts to sell energy, a consumer starts to sell energy, they then become an energy supplier. And energy suppliers, so for example, companies, they have pages and pages and pages of obligations that they need to meet to protect consumers. So what do we do in case of a consumer selling energy to others? How do you make sure that if something goes wrong, that consumer then can meet the responsibilities towards the other ones? Then there is the question of contracts. So I think this is more related to blockchain. Because of blockchain, you use smart contracts to enable trading. And again, there's an issue of irreversibility. So if something goes wrong, then you cannot reverse the transaction. And you're going to have to go to a court or an arbitration person to get your money back. So there, as I said, there are many specific issues related to blockchain. And we hope to look at these through the task force. In terms, so I'm going to wrap up here with this slide. As I said, there's a lack of consensus in the field, and there's also a lack of consensus as regards how to regulate these models. So some countries have already decided to draft laws without really testing any pilots. For example, France and Spain, which are quite strict in terms of the perimeters and the scale that they can have, these models. And I've heard people complain that they're too restrictive, these laws, because they kind of like stifle innovation, you could say. And then other countries, I think in the name of promoting innovation, have started sandboxes. And a sandbox is a space in which the regulator allows for a pilot to be rolled out, and then they see what the results are. And based on that, they then draft laws. So these are very different approaches, and we're seeing both approaches as regards peer-to-peer energy trading. And I think that none of them is perfect. Both of them have their issues. And I think a mix could be good, perhaps, of both approaches. But it's really, the key is really about flexible policy making here. And I think this is an issue with other sectors undergoing peer-to-peer networks, like with Uber and Airbnb. This is the same kind of question. How do you regulate these models in a flexible manner that makes sure that you don't hurt innovation while you protect consumers? And then, as I said, we're planning to compare countries, so do an international comparative analysis. But we're already seeing that countries have different aims. So for example, in the US, the pilots are much more about resolving grid issues. For example, like blackouts, natural disasters. So it's really about the grid. And then in Europe, it's much more about the prosumer, how they can drive the energy revolution, you could say. So there are already different approaches, and I think it will be interesting to compare already these countries. I think it will be quite tricky, but interesting. So in sum, our aim is to compare these the countries, the pilots going on in the countries, the approaches taken by the countries, and to provide this evidence to policymakers and to other stakeholders. And I'm going to talk a bit more about how to join and the value for people. But we have a website, so if you want more information, feel free to visit this website. So in terms of the value, as I said, for policymakers, they need evidence. So they need evidence for their policymaking efforts. They need to see how other countries are handling these models. So I think that's the main advantage of becoming or like contributing to the Global Observatory for policymakers. Then we have businesses and nonprofits. So as I said, they can see what the situation is in a certain country. And also the network is quite important for them. And researchers, they get an international platform to collaborate with and for their research. In terms of joining, so for policymakers and regulators, we are planning to set up a policy advisory group, which is a very informal group of policymakers that are working on these topics. And the aim is for them to tell us what they need in terms of information and what format, and to kind of guide our work, because it's really important that our work is useful for them, especially. So if you're interested in getting involved, get in touch with me, and then we can be in touch about this policy advisory group. For businesses and nonprofits, so there are several ways to get involved. The main one that I've seen is the second one here on the slide, which is to become you as an individual. You can then become a participant as an expert, and then you can contribute to our work. And this brings me to my last slide, I think. So basically, these 150 people that are part of the Global Observatory, they are then these experts, and they're really the driving force of the observatory. So they join subtasks and they work together on deliverables. And anyone from any sector can join as an expert. There's also no obligation as regards time or input. So it's really according to your schedule, let's say. So there are no obligations. I would say that it's just important that the work, the topic falls within your current line of work. So because participation is not remunerated. So really it's about, it should fall within your current scope of work, let's say. So that's it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A. And also if you want any information or you want to ask anything, then please get in touch with me by email. You see my email address on the slide here. And I'd be happy to be in touch with you after this webinar if you have any questions. And I'm gonna